Okay. So welcome everybody. Welcome to the Water Race Committee meeting, Wednesday, 16th of August, 2023. So I will start off with a karakia te matanga. Mā te pai moanga rara ki te tai. Mā te awa tonga rara ki te awa raki. Tēnei te hauparui awhai ai taratahi. Whanau haramai te toki. Hamai kioi ai taiaki ai. Thank you. Call for apologies. I've got apologies from John Booth and David Ellison. And is Michael Hewison an apology?
Well, he didn't ring.
No.
Might be running late.
Can I have a mover and a seconder that the apologies be accepted? Sorry. Thank you, Neil. Seconded, John McFadzean. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Has anybody got any conflicts of interest declarations on anything in the meeting agenda today? So.
Does anyone own a water race?
Yeah.
Okay.
Wouldn't be here if you didn't.
I haven't been notified of anybody in public forum today, and there's nobody present, so we'll move on to the confirmation of the minutes of the last meeting, which was 17th of May. We have got the minutes in front of us. Is there any discussion or questions over anything in the minutes? And I've just got one question, probably for Jeff. And on the bottom of page 8, Jeff will investigate options for increasing FTE full-time equivalent hours to accelerate knowledge transfer from Heike to Sarah. Jeff,
More than happy to talk about that at this stage. We're 2 days a week, and we'll continue to review that, probably more so as the weather dries out and there is more availability to spend more time. So I know there's certainly a desire on Sarah's part to move on faster.
Good, thanks for that. Anybody else got any questions on the agenda? Okay, so somebody present at that meeting moved and seen a true and accurate record. Mover. Thanks, Steve. Seconder. Thanks, Jill. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Okay, we'll move on to item 6.1, the water race report. And the author of this is Lawrence.
I think we'll just go through, give you a bit of an update in terms of the reconsenting application. The application has been fully lodged with the regional council. And speak of devil, Michael. There's a seat up here.
Hang on.
And that was
Someone outside the door who was after something, I think.
So that was at the beginning of August, I think like the 31st of July, 1st of August. The regional council officer is still reviewing that, had a preliminary discussion with them because the previous officer we were dealing with left. So we've got a new person who's dealing Paula Pickford, who's dealing with it, and this is the first time she's getting up to speed. I expect there to be a Section 92, so an extension of time for her to be able to get and understand a bit better. But hopefully by the next sort of meeting, we'll have a bit of an update on what if there's any further information that are required. or if there is some indication on whether or not we might, we've put it in so it would be non-public. And then we've done enough consultation, but
Non-noted.
not notified, sorry, yes, yeah. But there wasn't really information early on at the moment. The Longwood Water Race for South Wairarapa was non-notified, but that was only a short-term 5-year consent application, so not a longer term. We're going for 20 years currently. Basically, in terms of the reports, the only additional information has been all around the consenting in terms of how it complies with the Natural Resources Plan and any new legislation that's come out in the last bit. So the only, so the previous reports on ecology, hydraulics and that I have all, they're still the same. There's been no modification or update on those. I think that's the main thing at the moment, unless anybody's got, oh, sorry, there has been, and John will be familiar, so some of the users, such as John, who have a so doesn't use it for drinking, not drinking water, non-potable supply, stock water, so an industrial use or irrigation use, there's still some uncertainty about how that's going to be consented. So, yeah.
Irrigators.
Yeah.
Aye.
So thanks, Lawrence. Questions? John?
We get to see the consent?
I can share it around, yeah, but there's a lot of documents, so yeah. The application itself, yep, I'll share that and put a link in.
The other question I had was, you've got engagement with interested and affected parties. So you're sort of trying to do it in a non-notifiable.
They're more restricted, so engage with a wider people who would normally be, or sorry, people or organisations that would normally. So I used the application from 2003 or whatever.
Yep.
So anybody who had submitted there, tried to talk to them early on. So they've already been engaged to try to cover that rather than a full go out to public and have all sorts.
So you've talked to, like, you've had some discussions with like iwi and Fish and Game.
Yes. And shared with them and had some feedback. Fish and Game are the only ones that came back for the updated consent application. So we gave a draft application, a copy of the draft application back in December. And then an updated one with 3 or 4 weeks for them to review and make any comments to come back to include with the actual formal application.
Yeah, and so they were the two, Fish and Game and iwi. They were the two most interested parties.
Yes, yeah.
Last time.
Yes, and nothing from Fed Farmers, though I did talk to Liz. Yeah. And Marston also submitted because their take of the Taranaki is close proximity to the water take. Yeah.
So in your, a couple of things. So Liz McFadzean, Federated Farms, I've spoken to her a wee while ago, and her view was that, yeah, they do have an interest, but she acknowledged that the Carterton water race system, they really didn't have any issues with, because they knew it was being run like it is with input from elected members.
That would have been useful to include. That would have been useful to include that feedback in the application, but yes. Okay.
Yeah, so that was her comment to me anyway.
Okay.
But so how have you got on with, so iwi and Fish and Game?
Yep.
So where are you up to with them?
We didn't get any updated. We'd had some about I've had 3 or 4 with both iwi, meetings with both iwi to give their sort of what their feelings are. And I've got another couple of meetings soon. So I've been more treating it as ongoing engagement rather than this is what they say and no further or anything.
You're documenting those meetings.
Yes,
As
yeah,
part of the consent process. So it shows an ongoing dialogue with iwi as part of the forms that and the information that Lawrence is submitting as part of Greater Wellington's consent process.
yeah.
So they haven't submitted anything yet, obviously, have they?
No.
So then,
They'll be part of the.
yeah. So when we had discussions earlier on, we talked in terms of, we thought that it would be a good thing to actually take those people out to have a look at the water races. Because without looking at them, it's like you can get a pretty confused submission if they've never seen the water race system. So when would that take place?
We can see on, the easiest way I've found is to have a regular meeting set up with them, and usually if it's far enough ahead, they'll actually turn up and be able to program it into their sort of schedules. So could sort of try to arrange a meeting on site. I do know that Rangatani had shown an interest on like seeing some of the springs and that where they come up for Boots Creek and Parkvale. So yeah, could suggest to them I'm meeting Rangatani tomorrow for a meeting, so I could suggest a meeting on site.
So who are you dealing with? Who are you dealing with, Rangatani?
Hotopo, Parakia, Paikea and Amber.
And Ngāti Kānui, you're dealing with him?
I've only met with Ra.
Have you had any contact with Doc?
No,
Because Doc weren't involved in the 2001,
no, they weren't.
so they now own that 100 hectares of white pine bush on East Territory, which 2 water races run right through.
Okay.
So whether we need to be netting them in our stuff, for feedback from them, even though they own Carter's Reserve as well.
Yeah.
I guess if you've got Paula Pickford finally, so Paula Pickford has been at the regional council for a long time. I think she only works part-time now, but she knows all the history.
Sorry, that was Paula just calling because I've been trying to contact her to get an update. Couldn't put her on speaker. There you go.
So at least she is reasonably pragmatic.
Yeah.
And she will be there for the duration. So there might be a chance now that you would get somewhere, because I did note that there'd been a number of people, and unfortunately that's par for the course. And I guess then you mentioned about the irrigation take. So I guess I should just summarise that those are administered by Greater Wellington, who issue the irrigation takes for anyone, but they are out of the tail end of the water race. And there's a bit of debate about how much water you are allowed to put into the water race so that you know that you've got enough water down at that end for their approved irrigator to take that water. So there's quite a tension there, and it is a bit of an issue.
Yeah, but I think most of them we're sort of treating it as they've got some storage on site and they can only take if there's sufficient water, and you're not guaranteeing that.
Yeah.
And you're only allowing them if you're above. So there's still a stock take at those lower levels. So you're still complying with what there would normally be their restrictions. But the thing that we're getting around there is it's included as part of our take, yes, in terms of total
So
volume. It's not a new additional, which is where some of the irrigators have sort of run into it in terms of it's oversubscribed in terms of actual overall volume. So when they've gone for reconsenting, they said, oh, well, no, we're actually trying to cut back on what you can take. So if the overall volume is underneath what the water race is taking, as well as I think there's a little bit of an argument is if there are any nitrates or anything in there, you can use that and treat it in the irrigation to grow grass rather than it going back into the river. That's sort of an argument.
There's it's convoluted. Argument, because the irrigators are actually governed by the low flows in the river.
Hmm.
So what happened a few years ago was on the Mangatariri anyway, the regional council lifted the minimum low flow. So it's actually made it difficult to use irrigation water that's associated with the river anyway. So it's, and it's where the water, like if it's part of our water, in our consent, we're taking the water out of the river, but then when it goes down through the tributaries, a lot of it ends up back in the river. So I don't think that ever gets accounted for.
Well, as someone who's in that situation, I don't know whatever I use is accounted for, but that basically supplements my supply or it's not my total usage of it. Now that's accounted for, I don't know, but
I think that's part of what we're sort of proposing is to get a better handle going forward.
That's a good idea. I'll be happy with that.
Yeah.
Good to know. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't feel that I'm sort of taking advantage of something that's perhaps I shouldn't be. So.
But if you're going to, so you'd look to arrange for site visits, waterway site visits with these interested parties, Lawrence.
At least propose it, yeah.
I think it's really important before they do their submission. So they get a better understanding of actually how the water races operate and what the benefits are which will be in line with what they are actually wanting.
Yeah, I think and it's going to be interesting discussing it with iwi around that. Even though a lot of it, the water gets, the low efficiency means that a lot of the water is returned back to the river. They're still taking it as you're removing 40% of it at low flow. So trying to equate that in terms of protecting what's in the river.
I think when we last time when we did the consent, and we had those very questions, but when we pointed out the benefit to the fish life, and Pikey knows it better than anyone, but the benefit to the fish life, we were actually right on side with supporting what we were wanting. And I dare say that would be the same today. But that's the importance.
Potentially.
That's the importance of the site visits. But we don't want someone sitting in an office writing out a theoretical submission when you could have actually had the ones you're dealing with out on site and have a look at what's going on and then write a submission accordingly.
But thanks, John, and thanks, Lawrence, for your report. So
Sorry, that's just that.
that part, sorry, we'll go before we go on to the other.
Yeah. Fencing and guidelines. So we've had some updated maps around what is considered natural streams and what's considered actual water race, because there's not quite no rules, but there's a lot looser restrictions. But we're sort of complying with what is required in terms of stream clearance in the water race and natural streams anyway. So I think we're fine with that. But that we're also having a combination in terms of a bit of a common strategy with Greater Wellington and South Wairarapa around what you can do around your water races and any fencing restrictions in that there are. And those should be coming out fairly soon. We're just finalising those maps. So it's a little clear that you can actually look on the map and say, is it highlighted on my section that it is a water race or not, and whether it's not, it's a stream. And Carrington intake, no real update on that until weather conditions, but that is one issue that was raised with Fish and Game around a bit more of a better solution around that for fish passage. But we've got a bit of a plan for that anyway. And summary of service requests. Rachel.
Thanks. Right, so I'll let Heike talk in a minute. We've been fairly busy, so as you can see by the service requests and what's been done. And then we've got a new, what we call a new dashboard. So that's actually showing we're starting to pick up all the work that's been done and the type of work. And that way, hopefully over time, we'll start to see some trends of which areas we're going back to more often than not. And account for that in our budgets. So it's just the start of it. It's been in implementation for about 3 weeks now.
4 weeks.
Yeah, and we're
We've been
picking
working on
up,
them for quite a while, but we've
yeah,
only got to where we are now.
we're picking up quite a lot of information very quickly. So it's working well.
It's work in progress. We need to clarify what we do because there's so much misinformation out there on what we actually, the language we talk about, what when we do things like, I've talked to a lot of people since the survey, and maintenance is not cleaning to most people. It's fixing a culvert, fixing a head, fixing a washout. So I've talked to Rach and Grizz, and we're going to change the wording in when we gather the information. So it's a lot clearer.
Yeah.
And I've had quite a few people that have requested irrigation rights now, which we don't have irrigation from the waterways other than the GW ones. The clarification between a stock and domestic supply and irrigation are two totally different things. So we need to sort that out, because in the survey there was a quite high amount of people that said they actually irrigate, which they don't. They have a stock and domestic supply, which entitles them to have heavy use over a small run of time, because it's a 25 mil lead that goes to a 40,000 litre tank. So if they want to water blast their house, their car and their boat, and they want to use a 2-inch suction, they use their storage and it's replaced slowly. It's not direct from the race. So we just need to take irrigation out of it, because the irrigation is only limited to those 8 people and it's under a GW consent. So we need that separate, and because that's a huge charge compared to the domestic charge. So people think if they pay a bit more now, they can start irrigating, because a lot of people feel they already are, but they're only watering their garden. And that sort of thing. And especially the small block people just we need some sort of publication that we can send out. We have talked about a proper newsletter explaining what's not, how things work. So when people ring in and say that this is happening, it's not quite right, and then it makes it difficult because we go looking for the wrong thing.
Okay, Chair, just through you, just further to that, Rachel and team has done 2 things. So you would see there's a draft strategy that we want to publish on our website as well, to firstly educate the community and the users of what is the water race and how do we actually maintain it and what's part of it and what's not. So that will address a lot of that. And then also the code of practice that's also in probably close to a final draft. There's a workshop coming up where we will discuss both those documents, and that would change a lot of behaviour or educate a lot of the community around what to do and what not to do, when to do what, and what is actually part of the water. So that work, Rachel and the team has done a lot of work on that, and you get the documents today for review, and then we'll discuss it in a workshop soon.
It highlights the importance of a code of practice.
Yep.
Yeah. And the code of practice has got to be on simple terms. It's an easy read. That can't be a book. Like they would never get read. It's got to be 2-pager, 1-pager. But you've got to be, no, but it does, because you've got, like, you sort of got to, you get a generational sort of change in the occupation of the land. And then when you're getting lifestyles on, well, like really what's supposed to happen is that part of the consent of getting a subdivision has got answers. Question of the subdivider has got to make sure that things are in place, like gates on water races, you know, it's for access for you, for your diggers, all that sort of thing. But it's very important that people that come into the country understand the culture and the practice of what goes on in the water race system.
And that's what we aim to do.
Yeah, that's what the strategy report covers. So if anyone's got any questions, we can point them to the strategy when it's published on the website, and it'll be there for everyone.
I think it's really good, and thanks for preparing these two documents. So we've all got time to review them now. We've, as Johanna said, before the next workshop, so come along prepared with all your questions and answers will get answered or endeavoured to be answered or changed or whatever. So it's important that we do that and get it right.
And it'll be a live document as well,
So we can,
ongoing.
Yeah.
it's really good.
Yeah.
Right. Thanks for that. Lawrence, do you want to carry on with anything? Or
Any more in terms
I
of,
would see you.
anything more in terms of maintenance?
But we're just working with ground conditions at the moment.
Yeah, it's in here.
Yeah, you put it in there.
Well, how'd you get on? What's the story of those pine trees up at the one other intake point?
Well,
We didn't get you there because you're under a time constraint getting them out with the neighbour, weren't you?
But we had a contract with the forestry company, and the deal was because we have no access to the trees now, we need to come across somebody else's land, which we had permission to do that, but only through the February and March dry period, which never happened. So we had to can it. We need to probably go back to the forestry people now, but I see that the valuation of the trees has dropped. So we might not get as much money as we thought. So I think we need an agreement with the forestry people so we know where we stand, because I have to get my guys to install a gravel track across the farmland, and then when the trees are all gone, remove that and put the soil back. So there's a bit of prep work that I've got to do as well. But they are now 36 years old, and not only that's not the major concern for the people that live there, and Jules, one of them, is that the fact that all the people around there can't actually access the internet because the aerial is on the other side of the river, and the pine trees are shepherding everybody out of their internet services. So they're virtually over mature. There was 1,000 tonne of A grade. I don't know what the status of it is now, but we did in the document, I wanted every tree removed so that if in time the bank has eroded, all the logs that are left behind don't end up in the river, and we have a job in 10 or 15 years time picking them off the State Highway Bridge. So I will go back to Foreman's and talk to them, and once I get an idea, I'll get a written document with Rachel and Johannes and something for you to look at, and then we'll talk to Duckett's, because we're probably getting to the stage where they're not gone soon. He ain't going to give us access across his land, and then let it stay there.
Okay, answers that. That all your questions for Pikey and his report, Lawrence's report. So there's no other questions. We've got one recommendation that we received the report, so can I have a mover and a seconder that the report is received? I'll move. Neil, thanks Neil. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Okay, we move on to the item 6.2, the water quality report. Lawrence, you're the author of this too?
Yep. So basically, previous one, I've added on a bit longer term in terms of all the water quality we have. So you can see a bit of a variation in terms of, so you do get seasonal variation in terms of peaks when it's drier or peaks when it's wetter, depending on the actual contaminants. So solids when it's wetter and E. coli and nitrates when it's drier and the lower flows. And basically that's part of the evidence that was provided to the regional council. We'll have most of the it's not too bad. We've had higher periods where we've had high E. coli, but there is slow improvement. Now, because of the limited nature of where we've been sampling, you can't comprehensively say that that's improved practices, but you could sort of infer it in terms of more riparian planting. So you're getting less washing during those periods, as well as less access to the water races. And yeah, but those will be changing with the new freshwater targets. And actually it looks like I missed that comment out. It's one thing to be aware of is with the new freshwater management policy statements, there is a requirement on an evaluation on at least a monthly sample set to be able to evaluate it. So by that any further forward, we're probably going to have to at least double the monitoring that we do currently, as well as potentially in other ones. However, that's one of the things that we're looking at in terms of developing a monitoring plan as part of the conditions for the consent.
Can I ask a question, Mr. Chairman and Lawrence? My studies and working on the job is the E. coli, when we did have it, and I haven't got the documents or the readings with me, but I have got them in my files. We tested at 9,000 E. coli. And when I went back and retested it, it was coming in from the river at 9,000. So what restrictions would be put on us by GW when the water's already at 9,000 before we receive it?
And that's one reason why it's important getting those qualifications in terms of you've got an indicating of what's coming in as well as the downstream. So an upstream, downstream. So whatever you're discharging, you can actually try to attribute to this is what's coming into the water race. So that's probably going to be developed in terms of those monitoring requirements.
So where I've been
We can
doing,
actually-
where I did the weed cropping, where I put the trout weed.
Yeah.
Seeded in and reduced it from 9,000 to 48. We would be then expected to crop some of our races with underwater weeds to alleviate that as a filter, would we?
Potentially. So that's one of the things in terms of coming up, monitoring it, but also coming up with methods that you can actually start to improve that.
So just on that, not necessarily expected through consent, however, encouraged to improve. So the plan would be our plan of what we would develop and how we prove that what we do improve the water quality. They're not gonna, it's unlikely that they're gonna say that you have to plant this throughout the whole race to get to this outcome. They'll focus on the outcome, the result at the end, and say you need to try and get to this.
Yeah. And if we're able to, and if we're able to prove that, then that gives us as part of potentially the code of practice, we could say, right, all the end where it's discharging. So anything that we're putting back to the river, if we plant our crop, what do you call it, trout weed?
Weed, yeah.
Yeah, trout weed at all the discharges, we know that 100 metres of that, we can usually have no E. coli or low limits of E. coli going back into the river, as saying that we're controlling what our discharges are.
Yeah, well, in those tests, it was coming in the intake at 9,000 and at the discharge point from the water race, we're going out at 48, and it was 15,000 in the river. So the river had increased as it went down. But what the point that I was trying to figure out is what would the regional council have to do in the river above us to give us better quality water?
That wouldn't be doing
We,
anything.
they are the regulator, we don't regulate anything, so we
They're like
can't
God.
put anything on, we can't put on anything on there.
So then,
Yeah,
if-
you get no, as I said, there's pluses and minuses, so that would be, if we can say, well, as part of our evidence, we can say we're actually having a beneficial and it's part of that overall benefit.
Okay, so if we, just a theory, because there's 17 brand new houses gone in the gorge on either side of the river and they're all above the river,
Mhm.
then is the extra E. coli coming from their lifestyles and their systems? Should we not be how we allow people to live in that area?
So that's not something that's controlled necessarily by us. If they are affecting the river, then you could notify Greater Wellington, as any person can notify them of, what are you, of
Probably a failed discharge.
a failed discharge or something like that.
Yeah.
But that's regulated by Greater Wellington.
That's right, but these test results, they get a copy of that, so they should have known that the E. coli was that high.
They're not as smart as you.
The thing is though, you've got like, are we getting tests? So one thing, Lawrence, I just wondered if you could just determine the locations of these
Yeah,
so that we know, because they're sort of quite difficult for that. Like, we don't actually know where they are. Not offhand
I'll put
anyway.
a bit of a map in terms
Yeah.
of so each
So-
one, so it's identified.
But the thing is that what you're saying, Pikey, is that, so is the water at the intake, is that being tested? One of these tests is that, is it? One of these.
Both ends, we tested
Both
both ends.
TM1 or or
It is at the-
TM1
Okay.
is basically your,
One
Yeah.
is tested reasonably close to.
Yeah. So
Then
then,
when we got the 9,000, then Glenn and I went back and we took a sample at the river point of entry to our pipeline.
Yeah. so then if we, so therefore that in the resource, in the consent pro, there must be a section in there on management, what we do in managing, I presume, the waterways, is that right?
Mhm.
So then that stuff would be, all that stuff would be in there, like that workshop we had, we went through a whole lot of stuff.
Yeah.
That, like, we didn't even know something was happening, that you pointed out, Pikey, but, so all that is in management, so you do a proactive, I think Johanna said at their meeting, you do a proactive approach to your report and say, in management of the system, these are the things we're doing.
Mhm.
And they went through cleaning, all that stuff that we went through in that workshop.
That's part of that strategy, the code of compliance, the monitoring plan. It all feeds into that.
So then then when you get water tests like this, like the good thing is like they're really good news because they're justifying the management that we've run through that waterway system. So in terms of the E. coli, like it's compelling. If you look at the dates, when there's low flows, the E. coli goes through the roof. So therefore, there's justification for increasing flows, lifting minimum flows.
I don't think you can quite.
No, but it must add to it.
Maybe.
If you want good water, if you, like, what you've got to take out of this is that if you want your E. coli levels to be low, then the way to do it, according to the data that we've received for a long time, is that you have more water in the system.
I think
It's got to be a put.
Yeah, and that's where I was sort of going, the standards are changed so that we'd have to double to actually justify that to say definitively, because even though we have a large subset, it is only a grab sample, so once every 2 months. So
That's pretty good.
in comparison,
That's pretty good over a long period of time.
But your argument makes sense, and I think, like Lawrence said, is that will be taken into consideration. And then if we to finalise the monitoring plan and do have more regular testing, then that would support any future. Well,
So the cost of the monitoring, what's the cost of the monitoring that we do at the moment?
I think it's about 5 to 10% of the cost.
when we started, I think it was about 17, but it
Yeah,
costs have gone up
How much?
17,000 a year.
17,000
Yeah,
for the
when we
year.
started,
When we started.
that's a
Yeah.
few years ago.
Yeah, because the other question was that there's a note in here somewhere that some of those tests are actually that we were required to do weren't relevant. and they were expensive and not relevant.
At the last consent process, GW's biochemist Ted Taylor suggested that some of the things that Fish and Game had asked us to test for are not necessary, and it's a huge cost. They could, and in this consent process, we were going to be able to drop some of them out. So do less, but more of them. But I think where we're getting confused is that what you're talking about, more flow, only happens to the Carrington, because the Carrington water race goes dry from below our weir to the Carrington Road Bridge. The Wainava doesn't. So the argument that Lawrence is saying by leaving more water in, but it's really critical to Carrington to get more water into the race, so that the water that we're discharging at the other end is not being lost to the underground.
Yeah.
There's two different things, but Amos is right. The workshop, we need to thrash all these things out.
Yeah, because that's what we've talked about in pursuing an increase in the rate which was minuted last meeting. And that's our, that's the key goal for us, to lift minimum flows. So we get these results are better, and we do, and we achieve what we're supposed to be achieving.
Yeah, we'll need to. There was a large, quite a long debate about, because we've been on the 50, as in the lower 50 limits, since when the plan change came in, is whether or not we had any justification to request that higher limit to what we've been operating on.
Yeah.
So we've requested it.
Yeah.
But don't be surprised if they just say no, because you've been using the 50 or the lower limits.
Yeah.
You don't have any right.
Yeah, we'll debate that.
Depends on the season, doesn't it? Okay, so we'll move on. Anybody got any more
Questions? Yeah, sorry.
questions for Lawrence? Discussion, I think we've hammered it out pretty well. So we've got one recommendation that the committee receives the report. So I need a mover and a seconder. Looking.
You want to add the note and add a map of the sample sites? Just amend that
Or just
as a reminder.
Yeah.
We can bring it to the workshop as well.
Oh, yeah, cool.
Okay, seconded. All those in favour, please say aye. Against?
You get that one?
Carried.
Get who moved it, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
The seconder, sorry.
Lawrence moved his report.
I don't think.
Oh, no, we can't do that. The committee can't do that.
Nice try, Lawrence.
It's an upgrade from staff to.
Neil, I'll put Neil down. Neil looks down there smiling.
And you got the action, Robert?
The action,
The maps?
yeah, the maps.
Upgrade would be subjective, Jeff.
Well, always have to view you in high esteem.
Okay, so we move on to 6.3, the future direction for water race maintenance and operations. And Johannes, report.
Thank you, Chair. So as you all know, the water reform is happening. We through the establishment of a water service entity, our Three Waters assets gets taken over by a new water service entity that then provides potable water, treatment of wastewater, and manages stormwater in urban areas. Now, water races are currently not part of the reform. It's in the current legislation. It won't go in there. However, part of the wider discussion that the DIA or the National Transition Unit that is part of the DIA is having with us is how do we, what's going to happen to water races in the future? Now, step back with the reform, our team are working with DIA of how we and give input into a lot of the development within the water service entity of whether that's in asset management plan, our individual job descriptions and contracts with employees, the standards, the data, everything that we use, we are legislated to take part in that. And we're also part of building or designing the organization for the future. we can give advice and we give input, but we don't, it's not necessarily binding. The input that we give is not binding to the water service entity. Now, in recent discussions, when we're in planning for the Wairarapa hub of how waters are delivered in the Wairarapa, I got asked the question whether Carterton would want the new water service entity to maintain the water races on our behalf through a service level agreement. So what that means is that they've got all the staff, they've got the contractors. We agree to pay them a fee and they go and do it on our behalf. Obviously, in that service level agreement, we agree on level of service and all those kind of things, but that could be done. Now, in those discussions, this is really us giving advice. It's not binding them or us to anything, but it is considered in the development of the organizational design. Now, the paper in front of you, I basically asked you to endorse a position, basically. Option A is we continue like we do with the current state. So council staff maintains it on behalf of the water race users. Or option B is we encourage or we get the water service entity to build capability to do that in the future. Both has significant risks to it and both have great advantages to it. But it's basically just to have an understanding of what the committee's position is on that. Something to consider in option A, where Carterton continues to deliver that service, is that Carterton will lose some key staff to the water service entity. In this room, we've got Lawrence and Rachel that would get a job guarantee offer from the water service entity because more than 80% of their role relates to Three Waters. So naturally, they would go in there. Alternatively, they could reject that offer and remain with council. But the problem with that is that the water race is then the sole function and picking up that 80% of that's left over that used to be covered by the Three Waters. So what that means is to have the same expertise and capability, you'd either have to have those FTEs or you would have to contract it in order to have the same level of service. That there's something to consider. On the other side, with the water service entity, they will have a regional approach and a Wellington regional approach. They will have Wellington regional overheads and management and systems and functions and way of using. So you wouldn't be so close to the cost lever. There would be mechanisms in the service level agreement of how you provide input into that, but it would be different to the way that it is now. So that's just something to consider. Regardless of which way we go, at the workshop, the idea is to discuss, okay, if we are doing this option A or option B, what are the things that we need to consider? How are we going to mitigate the risks that's been identified? And how do we go to it? So that is basically the purpose of this paper. It is to just give us direction.
And the urgency or not around making a decision. So one of the other options may be that the Water Race Committee might want to engage with a wider user group before making a decision. And in terms of timing wise?
In terms of the urgency, if we can't make a decision now and want to engage, we could probably do that. The big piece of work the NTU is currently working on is the organizational design of the water service entity and the Wairarapa hub. So it would be prudent of us to give them steer sooner rather than later of the fact that we would want them to build that into their organization or not. So even though, I mean, if we need to go away and do consultation around it, we can do it. But the reality is also that even if we say we want it, it doesn't necessarily mean that it will happen, because it's not part of the legislation at this moment.
We'd have to deal with what's in front of us
Yes.
first, to their own business. And option B, I think most of us have experienced with anything run out of Wellington ends up as an unmitigated disaster. So
Yeah.
from my point of view, you'd put a line through option B straight away.
At least
We
you
can deal with,
change it every 3 years, John.
nothing changes from Wellington. So that, but I think when you, to lose control of, like, basically we've got a small system, a small business, to let it, to have that run out of Wellington would just be unbelievably disastrous. But the thing is with the council, things that we've got to look at is that in terms of, the first thing is in terms of rating, that the council actually collect rates on our behalf. And so we've got to, so that's good. That gives us protection, as opposed to, say, if we were running the business as a private business, we'd have bad debt on our hands, which we couldn't cope with. Everything in, like everything that around the waterways being it's a small part of council business. It's important to those ratepayers that have obviously, are embedded in the waterway system, and without it, would not be able to farm as they do today. So it's important from that point of view. We've got the environmental point of view, the flood waters that come off the waterway, come off the land and end up the waterways that Pike has to cope with. There's all sorts of things going on that mean that a system like that really can only be run from with a local input. There's no way in the world it could ever be run.
There are aspects that you may have to look at contracting out those likes of compliance that won't be in-house.
Yeah, I think, but you can do that though. You can do that. You'd be like, I would guess that, obviously Jeff and Lawrence, they're going to be Garden District. You're taking most of the business is going away from the council, isn't it? So then it'll be, proportionate to the amount of work they do for council and do it for the other outfit. But I guess those things will come out. But I think in terms of like consenting, and that we may well have to contract Lawrence back for that job. So it'd be more specific needs, but the overall running of the system, given how small it is in terms of business, would be run out of Carterton, as it is at the moment.
Thanks, John. Dale, you had a comment?
Yeah, thanks, John. That's it. There's cost and consequence either way because of the impact to this council from Three Waters, as Johanna said. So really the question is accepting that there will be cost and consequence that we have to manage going forward. Is your preference that the management of the water races stays with CDC or goes across to GWRC?
Neil.
My initial thoughts, I agree with what John says, and I would, just on the information, certainly support that we maintain as much control as we can, and bearing in mind that we may lose expertise somewhere else. But if the waterway system doesn't come under Three Waters, then what are we facing? Why are we sort of talking about this other than perhaps losing some expertise? What's that?
So as being part of the transition and developing the organizational design, I get asked the question, would you want the water service entity to do this service or not? Because other councils across the country might want that to happen. So Wellington Water is currently doing the maintenance of the water races on behalf of South Wadham District Council. So other councils might want that. I just need to have, I know what I think, but I need this committee to give me some direction and we minute it and say, this is the direction that we want staff to go. So when I sit in those meetings where giving input into the organisational design, that I can have confidence that I'm representing the community and not, and it's not just my thoughts.
We're sort of very proud of the fact that our system probably operates one of the better ones around compared to us in South Wairarapa. I would not want to lose that reputation or that advantage that we've got.
I think sometimes too, digressing a little bit, but sometimes it's very easy when something's been there for 120 years to take it for granted. And the point that I'd make, we've had visitors over the years to, the Glenbrae up Carterton there, and they've just been in absolute awe of the fresh running water through those systems, the fish, life, and stock, everything else. It's very easy to take it for granted because it's always been there, but it's also very easy to take for granted the simplicity of it and really the simplicity of the management system. And like we were talking about before, what Pikey's done with putting these weeds in and purifying water and stuff like that, all that stuff is sort of modern. That's new stuff. We didn't have to worry about that years ago, but the water race was still functioning fine. It hasn't functioned better because we're doing all these tests and everything. It's actually functioning the same. So we've got to answer more questions to satisfy basically the social license of running a system. So,
Well said, well put.
We don't want to lose the knowledge that we've got. Someone else who may view things different to we do.
And I guess, do you need to make a decision today, or you've talked about a workshop with something you'd thrash out more detail at a workshop before you give some sort of indication? Because clearly I work around all of these areas, and my prevailing thought would be that and I am a water race user as well, so I have it on my land, but I would much rather be in control of what we do than someone else by remote control. And I do see what happens by remote control, and I just tear my bloody hair out of frustration and the whole incompetence of the whole process. So I think that I would have a strong view that you should seriously look at maintaining how you do it, and notwithstanding that there might be a loss of some expertise, but you'll be able to find that in other ways. There's always a way around something, but control and cost will go out the window.
I don't think this has to go to a workshop at all. I think it's cut and dried, and I think the important thing is to move, which I'd be happy to do, in favour of option A. Johannes then can go to any meeting from today onwards and say, "Yep, I've got a direction, and this is what it is." Poof.
And I would take a second.
And if there's any little crinkles or hiccups along the way, we'll sort them out as they go.
Yeah.
But we've got to give, Johannes is a strong guy. He's got to go on the recommendation, and then you take it out of any further discussion.
Do you want to tell us what you think, Johannes, before we vote, or
It's
not?
been
Thank
curious
you.
to hear out, obviously.
There's a couple more. Jill wants to speak and
Yeah, I totally agree to keep it local. That's my preference. I think it'd be prudent to have an idea of what costs we're looking at on both alternatives. So I was also interested to know what your hands thought.
So my initial thought as a ratepayer, I would say that I would probably prefer to keep it in Carterton. The challenge with the water service entity, because this is currently not legislated, they wouldn't be able to give us, we wouldn't be able to compare anything with anything. So if we could probably know what the cost would be to replace Rachel and Lawrence, we can know that. But we've got no idea what the water service entity is going to charge us to do the maintenance and how they're going to be at that. It's impossible for them to even know that at this stage, and I can guarantee you, and I think Jeff should support me, that they would never commit to that at this stage. So my initial thoughts were that this committee would support option A, and that we would, as with any other challenge, that we would come up with a strategy of how do we deal with those risks and mitigate it.
Mr Chairman, we have a council mandate and a ratepayer mandate from the 2005 public meeting of 286 water race ratepayers as it is to remain in the same condition and manage the way it was in the future. So you probably long term have to go back to the owners, which are the ratepayers.
If we were changing.
If we want.
If we're going to change it.
Steve, you had some comments?
No, I'm kind of thinking back from when councils gave up the opportunity to look after our own roads. And I look at the work that is being done at the moment, and I don't see it being up to anywhere near the standard that used to be done by our own people working for the councils at the time. And I can just see it, the same thing happening with the water race network if it was handed over to someone else. They don't have the same pride or care and so forth in looking after it as what we would. So
Thanks, Steve. I think we've just been right around the room and
Stephen?
thanks.
I think it's working good. I think not broke, don't fix it.
Exactly.
So I think, yeah, thanks, Steve. We've thrashed it out fairly well, and I think the feeling of the meeting, by the look of it, is we don't need to take this to a workshop. I think yeah, I've got you down here, John, that you first of all, I can take. I better get a mover and a seconder that we receive the report first. So, Steve and Neil seconded. So I'll put the motion that we receive the report. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. I've got a mover and a seconder for the recommendation 2, which is endorse option A. Following the Three Waters reform, CDC continues with the maintenance and operations of the water race network. I've got a mover, John McFadzean, and a seconder, Neil Wadham. So I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
aye.
Against? So that's carried unanimously. So we don't need to go to recommendation 3, which endorsed options.
That's my point.
Ron.
Yeah, I just want to say congratulations, because I was hoping you'd go there. And I'll make a confession. When I was reading this paper, I got a little angry. And then I made the assertion, I sent Karen McAnulty a text and said, what the hell are you doing? And then when I raised the issue this morning, the CE very kindly made me realise that I misread the paper, and what I was seeing as a compulsory move into Three Waters was in actual fact the option. So you've I've been placated twice today. So but I would just endorse what Councillor Cretney was saying. You know, when I look around me over the last how many years at various decisions that were made by other councils, whether it was parks and reserves, whether it was management of water infrastructure, whether it's management of roading. There are councils all over the country that moved to the modern trend to outsource. And now many of them look at Carterton and ask us, how did we do it? And how is it we're doing what we're doing? And why is it the Carterton district is so far ahead of councils very much larger than us in terms of the way in which we deliver these services and the way in which we maintain them, and the fact that we have still built for the future, managed to build for the future. So I have every confidence that you will ensure that our water races are, their Tīnaranga Tiratanga is maintained, their sovereignty, their ownership, and that they will continue to deliver the service that they've done for how many, 100 odd years. So congratulations. I think it's a good decision.
Thanks, Ron. Thanks for those comments. Move on to 6.4 water race finance report. Kyra, do you want to come over on the report, please? Welcome.
So
This is just a draft financial report. We have not finished it for and I have made a couple of tweaks since the first one, which is to corporate services and operational overheads has been reduced slightly. And there was a resource consent expense that was brought in as an accrual at year end. They pretty much cancel each other out, so there's not much change. In the income, I noticed that the water race for the fees industrial use wasn't as high as budgeted, and in years going back to 2021, and this has been put down to a couple of the larger users moved to their own water supply, which I've commented on. So we will reduce that budgeted amount in the next financial year at LTP to reflect that, because that we're not likely to receive the around the 28,000 in income in the future. And is this
Happy to talk about the overhead.
yes.
John raised a valid question. I'm down on page 24 for those on. Someone's using the electronic. Yeah. Oh my. Well, Steve is. Steve Cretney is. Well done, Steve. It's off to. It's off to the minority.
Not voting for the
John raised a very valid question around the overhead charge from the operations of council to the water race activity. So if you look there, it's in the expenditure, it's second line down on that detailed report, and the furthest out on the right-hand column shows about $48,209 in the 2020-21 year. And then shortly thereafter, it moved up to 162, and the budget's gone up. Now, so that calculation, councillors will recall, we've been through the revenue and financing policy, and that's set as part of how much of it should be attributed to the users, how much of that is attributed to general rates. And so that split is made up as part of our revenue and financing policy and is set as part of our long-term plan. And we have the opportunity to reconsider that split. That is, we are currently going through that revenue and financing policy now, and that will be again adopted as part of our long-term plan. So if we think there is something wrong, or if we don't agree, I'm not sure it's wrong, but it was set by council 3 years ago. If we think that needs to be reviewed as part of our long-term plan revenue and financing conversations, that's when we would review that percentage split.
What is the percentage split on that?
I'm not sure the answer is straightforward. I seem to recall it was 11%, but it is a percentage of the remaining overheads of operating council. And we attribute some of those overheads towards the water races, some of them towards community services, some of them towards waste, some of them towards roading. And we allocate out that remaining overhead to those activities of things that council do. This is one of the activities that gets a share of that overhead.
So will that change, just coming back to the previous conversation, post Three Waters and the shift of staff and so forth? That'll be a discussion then, won't it?
It will occur again, and what my expectation is because the Three Waters is gone and we're no longer able to attribute overhead to the Three Waters costs, the amount of overhead that is attributed to the assets and the activities that are left will increase. And that will be roading and waste and community services and water race. So that's what we refer to. You may have heard a term called stranded overhead as part of Three Waters reform. So there is a conversation that is occurring about each council being no worse off. So you may have heard a no worse off fund. Part of being no worse off is when you take out the Three Waters component of council's business, what's left, you still need to operate a billing system. You still need to collect rates, and you still have the same number of ratepayers. You no longer have waters activities in order to allocate some of that cost against. So councils will be worse off with Three Waters gone, and we will have stranded overheads, which is a conversation we're currently having with DIA about how much those stranded overheads are. In our case, it's somewhere like about $2 million a year, we think our stranded overheads could be. And so that's a conversation about how we share those costs and how we deal with those costs, both Three Waters.
So that needs to be clarified before we really tinker with the percentage right now, coming back to.
Absolutely, and we're doing that work right now.
The problem, the difficulty in this, and I've done a few more calculations on these figures, but the difficulty is that you weren't here.
No, I wasn't.
Neither were you.
No, most of the
No, that's a problem because what's happened is that, and I had a good look at these the other day, and like I said, the last meeting, like from 2021 to 2022,